Good day, everyone. For today's topic, it is about pre-Hispanic source materials for the study of Philippine history by William Henry Scott. When we say pre-Hispanic, it is an era or period before the Spaniards arrived in the Philippines. And source materials for the study of Philippine history, it is an historical evidences, and information or source materials that about the Philippine history. So for today, we will analyze the source materials which claim to be about the study of Philippine history. These are the following sources: the Maragtas, the Code of Kalantiaw, Povedano manuscript, and Pavon manuscript. We will also discuss the contribution of Jose A. Marco to Philippine historiography, and lastly, what is known to be Filipino people before the Spaniards arrived in 1521, and it is from the pre-Hispanic source materials. First, the Maragtas. Maragtas, it is about the history of Panay. The Maragtas is written by Pedro E. Monteclaro, and according to the author, the Maragtas is based from the two manuscripts he found, not just only from his imagination. The first manuscript is from an 82-year-old man from his town that had been a teacher from his town, which is passed until reached to him. And the other manuscript, he found it in a bamboo tube where his grandfather kept his old papers. The Maragtas is all about the history of Panay, from the first inhabitants of Bornean immigrants. These Bornean immigrants are the 10 datus or chief. If we say datus or chief, they are the highest rank in the society before the arrival of Spaniards. The 10 datus escaped from the cruel Datu Makatunaw in Borneo, and they immigrate in the island of Panay. The 10 datus, namely Puti, Sumakwil, Datu Bangkaya, Datu Palborong, Datu Paduhinog, Datu Dumangsol, Datu Dumalugdog, Datu Lubay, Datu Valenzuela, and Datu Umangsil. The Maragtas consist of 6 chapters and an epilogue. The first chapter, it describes or talks about the former customs, the clothes, dialect, heredity, organization of Aitas of Panay. These Aitas of Panay, when we say Aitas of Panay, these are the native people from Panay, with special mention of Maricuduzon. Maricuduzon is the old chief of Pulpulan. The second chapter, it begins a narrative of 10 datus, which they fly from Borneo to escape Datu Makatunaw there. And the 10 datus purchased the island of Panay from Maricudo. The third chapter, it tells the romance of Sumakwil and Kabingan and her lover Gorong-Gorong. The fourth chapter, it concludes the tale of 10 datus, telling their political arrangement of the circumnavigation of the island of Panay. The fifth chapter, it describes the language, commerce, clothing, customs, marriage, cockfighting, timekeeping techniques, calendars, personal characteristics, funeral and mourning habits. The sixth and final chapter, it gives a list of officials between 1637 and 1808. The epilogue, it contains a few 18th century dates from Yagao. It's the history of First Dato. In chapter 2 and 3 of the Maragtas, it is differ from the rest of the book because it is a narrative and the content appear earlier source, which translated by Father Tomas Santarin and published Historia de los primeros datos que presidentes del Borneo poblaron estas islas, or in English, The history of the first datos coming from Borneo populated the island. The two chapters in Maragtas, the chapter 2 and 3, recount the same events and contain no real historic data. These are the differences between the Maragtas by Pedro E. Monteclaro and the Historia by Father Sandalin. The Maragtas, it introduces new characters with necessary biographical identification, while Historia, in a manner of folk history, it often mentioned their names after they played some part in narrative. Maragtas, it cites municipality and province, an apparent contradiction in the name of the original settlement. While Historia, it presupposes the reader's prior knowledge of the places. Maragtas, the style is more on imaginative passage, where there is a repetition, changes of the subject, incomplete plot development, and lack of planning. While Historia style, it is only a simple statement. But moreover, the Maragtas and Historia have in common, where they have in common about the romance, where romance is everywhere. According to the historian, that Maragtas is not considered as containing facts which are accurate and true because many of his data do not tally with what we hear from old men. Second, no information is given about the language of the original and the condition of the manuscript. And lastly, the Maragtas gives no reasonable ground for supporting the existence of configuration of Madhyas. When we say configuration of Madhyas, it's about the 7 resolution adopted by the 7 datos as a kind of political constitution. In the Maragtas, there is a legal code that mentioned, and it is written by Dato Sumakwin, one of the 10 datos. The legal code is also known as the Maragtas Code. The Maragtas Code is about the variety of general cultural information, such as customs, Visayan equivalents of days of the week, and dialect differences. Among the customs, there are 4 stringent sanctions. 4 stringent sanctions, it is imposed by Dato Sumakwil to the island of Panay and to the people. The first stringent sanctions, those too lazy to work were bounded over to the wealthy under their reform. Failing, they were cast out of society to live with negritos. Second, the polygamy was practiced until population control became necessary. It was restricted, and the children to those poor to support them were grown. Third, unredeemed adultery was punished by death and disinheritance. Lastly, fingers of thieves were cut off. This statement can be authenticated as an actual way of life of pre-Hispanic Filipino. The Maragtas, it is known as the oldest written body of laws in Philippines. But in the Maragtas, it is not phrased as laws. According to the Maragtas Code, the most and serious severe punished offense was laziness, but technically it is not true because there is offenses such as punished by death. However, the author did not provide any data or clue by which the authenticity of this code could be established. And according to William Henry Scott, that Maragtas is not a pre-Hispanic document but a book written by Pedro E. Monteclaro, a local historian of Panay. Now, let's proceed to the Code of Kalantiaw. The Code of Kalantiaw, it is Jose Marco and Jose Maria Pavon, Antiguas Leyendas, is the source of Code of Kalantiaw. The Code of Kalantiaw was supposed a legal code of the epic history, Maragtas. It is said to have been written by Dato Kalantiaw in 1433 a chief of island of Negros. The code itself contained one of the 5 manuscripts by the library in 1914, which received from Mr. Jose A. Marco of Pontevedra in Negros Occidental. This consists the following manuscript. First, the Historia de la Isla de Negros by Diego Lope Povedano. Second, Map of Negros. Third, Las Antiguas Leyendas de la Isla de Negros by Diego Povedano. Fourth, Brujeras y los Quintos de Fantasmas by Jose Maria Pavon. Los Cuentos de los Indios de esta Isla de Negros by Jose Maria Pavon. The code is now believed by many historians to have been a hoax, and it had actually been written in 1913 by Jose E. Marco as a part of his historical fiction, Las Antiguas Leyendas, or in English, the Ancient Legends of Island of Negros, which he attributed to the priest Jose Marco. And there is no present evidences that any Filipino ruler named Dato Kalantiaw. Next, we will proceed to Povedano manuscript. The Povedano manuscript consists of 4. First, the Povedano manuscript 1572. Second, Povedano Map of Negros 1572. Third, Povedano manuscript of 1578. And lastly, Povedano manuscript of 1577 and 1579. First, we will talk about what is the content or what is about the Povedano manuscript 1572. Povedano manuscript of 1572, it is about the La Isla de Negros or the Island of Negros ethnography. This consists the following. 17 pages is the legends about the original world and the local places names. 14 pages is about marriage of customs, religion, and calendars. 10 pages, it is a description of Visayan alphabet. And the last is the reference section called on how they worship their false god, called Kabunian. According to the historians, the orthography of the document is rather inconsistent. The Povedano spelling like the use of K instead of C and E, PH instead of F, using Q and C. Third, Povedano's transcription are improbable, for they are alphabetic and not syllabic. Calendar is difficult to read because of the crudeness of the characters, and they are squeezed together, and the words contracted. It shows some codlets, and list of weeks, days is also inconsistent with the calendar. Now, let's proceed to the map of Negros in 1572. It is about the original map of Negros that was drawn on parchment and measure 14 by 23 centimeter. It is considered as the very old map of Negros. The map of Negros, it is a geographical map which describes the voyage of the author Diego Lope Povedano, the shores for His Majesty and the King of Spain. According to Povedano, the most easily recognized places are Ilog, Himamaylan, Binalbagan, Hinaygaran, and Marayo. On the northwest coast, the general areas of Himamaylan, Pontevedra, and also the Bacolod. The tip of Negros is the Cebu and the Siquijor Island. Also, it's shown the Mount Canlaon in the map of Negros. In a map of Negros, there is a picture scale, which called Leo Linear. It means a mile in medieval British. Next, the Povedano manuscript of 1578. The Povedano manuscript of 1578, it is written on 123 leaves with measure of 21 by 32 centimeter, which obviously a modern manufacture which combines the features of Gothic, Roman type, and Italian Renaissance calligraphy. According to the historian, The manuscript of 1578 confuses F and S. It shows no similarity to the other Povedano manuscript. And the title page gives a signature unlike the 1572 document. Next, we will proceed to the last manuscript of Povedano, the 1577 and 1579. According to Garcia, the contents of the manuscript display so many anachronisms that neither has seriously been considered as authentic. Now let's proceed to the last manuscripts, the Pavon manuscript. The Pavon manuscript, it is about the Las Antiguas Leyendas de la Isla de Negros, or in English, the old legends of the island of Negros, and Los Cuentos de los Indios de Isla, or the stories of the native. The manuscript, it consists 25 chapters of legends and myths, 11 superstitious current in Pavon's day, 26 straightforward ethnographic nature such as weapons and Philippine alphabet, a native calendar, and translation of 10 documents written in a personalized style of considerable charm, moralizing digression, and proposed acknowledgement of oral and written sources. And lastly, 25 different information on 22 dates between 1830 and 1840. The Pavon manuscript, it is devoted to ethnographic matter, such as food, medicine, religious beliefs, funeral rites, mourning customs, law, farming, fishing, hunting, and many others. It summarizes a variety of anthropological data truly and concisely any other Spanish document. Lastly, it concludes unique and valuable data description of arboreal, bone washing, ceremonies, and a huge plantation of tobacco which was being their economic in the entire island. Among the documents translated with the Prehispanic dates, the 6 documents present examination of Jose E. Marco to the contributions of Philippine historiography, namely 137 accounts of old forts, second 1232 narrative of King Maranhik, 1372 description of burial custom, 1372 list of extinct animals, 1433 Code of Kalantiaw, and lastly the 1489 Making Talismans and Charms. According to the historian, the Pavon manuscript, it shows inappropriate title. 15 other documents are highly suspicious, for they are doubtful, unclear, and meaningless. The Visayan alphabet given by Pavon contains the same error like the Povedano, and the form of the characteristics are more likely by Povedano than Philippine script. And the historian add the following anachronism in the text of Pavon. First, the author prays for the preservation of King of Spain on June 24, 1838 and dedicates a book to him on August 1, 1839. Although Spain had no king between 1833 and 1874. Second, the author expresses his gratitude on January 14, 1838 on Don Morquico, the same gentleman named as attesting to discover the Povedano 1572 map on March 23, 1833. Although Manuel Morquico was not appointed alcalde mayor of Negros until January 8, 1847. Third, the author presents a document signed by Francisco Diza. On March 31, Diza was born in 1620, so if the year 14 is a standard contradiction for 1714, he would have been 96 at the time of executing this document. Moreover, there is no province of Negros Occidental either in Pavon's day. Fourth, the author refers to an ancient fortress located on the seashore, next to the barrio occupied by the Monteses and Gio, about 20 licuas north of its town. Ligua, it is a distance. The ligua means a distance. Has varied during the different periods of Spanish history, but there is no time 3.9 kilometers in Pavon's day. Fifth, the author refers to the great and the extinct Lemurian content. Lemuria was an imaginary landmass. And lastly, in the Pavon's description of calendar, the author makes the following description of the month of November. They called it a bad month. But Pavon and Povedano manuscript have an issue to its orthography, like the use of K instead of C and Q employed in Spanish accounts. Pavon and Povedano manuscript has no C, O, or R. They use the letter K instead of C. There are even more confusing issues regarding to that two manuscripts, and it is the anachronism. Now we will talk to Jose E. Marco, what is his role or contribution to Philippine historiography. You ever heard his name mentioned in the Code of Kalantiaw, in the Pavon and Povedano manuscript? Jose E. Marco is the one who wrote the Code of Kalantiaw, and in the Pavon manuscript, he presents an examination to the contribution to Philippine historiography. The 6 documents are translated with Prehispanic dates. But before that, the first contribution of Jose E. Marco to Philippine historiography is his own Reseña Histórica de la Isla de Negros. It is the first account of the island of Negros before the Spaniards established themselves in the island of Subo and Samar. In 1912, Jose E. Marco sent to Philippine Library and Museum what is to be known as the 3-part documents. The document was written in an old Philippine script that presumably cuttlefish ink. According to Jose E. Marco, the documents were wrapped in wax in the cave of Negros Occidental. The content of the 3-part documents is about the Maragtas invocation to the bird. Second, it is a summary of the dance called Lulay. And third, it is the longest, consists of 87 lines, describes the personalities of old Philippine methodology. But according to the historian about the 3-part documents, the characters are misused as the equivalents of the letters of the Spanish alphabet. There is no codlets, same to the other manuscript like Pavon and Povedano. Then there is no letter for and G, confusion of Y and I, U and W. The use of G or I. In sometime 1931, Jose E. Marco informed his annotator, Manuel Artigas, the existence of the unpublished manuscript by Reverend Jose Maria Pavon. Manuel Artigas published an article called Prehispanic Civilization and published information about the Philippine, a calendar, Philippine laws, and forts. In November 21, 1913, they issue an historic discovery. An ancient map shows the island of Poglas. To conclude, based on William Henry Scott, the Maragtas Code of Kalantiaw, Povedano manuscript, Pavon manuscript are Hawke's document. In his book, Prehispanic Source Materials for the Study of Philippine History. Because the manuscripts or documents are inconsistent and they present no historic data. The contribution of Jose E. Marco to Philippine historiography was a real masterpiece of fantasy and absurd, because his document appeared to be deliberate fabrications with no historic validity. This is actually the history of Philippines, about the Filipino people before the Spaniards arrived in 1521. And this is from pre-Hispanic source materials. During 500,000 years ago, men of species are called Homo sapiens. They live in cave like Palawan and Batangas. As early 400,000 BC it is before Christ. Early men of species are called Homo erectus. They live in Cagayan Valley together with the extinct species or animals. In 5,000 years of pre-Christian era, this is called Stone Age Filipinos, because Filipino people use weapons made by stone, and they occupy the major island like Hulu, Zamboanga, Davao, Negros, Samar, Batangas, Laguna, Rizal, Bulacan, Cagayan Valley, and Palanante. And the language they use are the Austronesian. About 5th millennium BC, the Austronesian language was replaced. In the 3rd millennium, Filipino people produce ornaments, they make pottery, and several types of decoration. And during the last pre-Christian, Filipinos became excellent pottery and were local and imported jewelry. 3rd century BC, they know how to cast iron and bronze. Beginning of the Christian era, Filipinos know how to weave their own clothes, smelt iron, and making glass ornament. In the next 1,000 years, Filipino occupy the mountain like Ifugao in Cordillera. They make pottery, exquisite gold work, and furniture. They import beads and porcelain and many others. In the 10th century AD, it is Anno Domino, or in the year of the Lord. This year or this century, both countries began to trade. And the first calendar in Philippine history was being released. In 11th century, Butuan ruler named Sari Batashaha sent tribute mission to China. At the end of 12th century, Visayan Sea riders attacked Hokkien coast. In 13th century, Mindoro, Butuan, and Jolo were Bornean outposts. Chinese merchantmen transferred their goods to Philippine shipping for the local retail. In this century, the Tausug migrated Butuan from Jolo. At 14th century, they made attack on Borneo. Mindoro cloth began traded on the west coast of Malaysia. Hindu-Buddhists influenced the Philippine religious. Luzon sent tribute mission to China, and both Mindanao and Hulu trading centered in non-Philippine tropical products. Century,
15th.
Pangasinan and Luzon sent tribute mission to China. Mindoro sent a Muslim envoy. Chinese minister visited in Mindanao to organize trade and tribute mission. Sharif Haslim Abubakar became the first dato of Holo, and Manila was founded. In year
1521.
It is the arrival of Ferdinand Magellan to the Philippines. And that is all about the pre-Hispanic source materials for the study of Philippine history by William Henry Scott.